Good evening. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here with us. We're really excited about this program. It's going to be a really special evening. And I have some prepared remarks, but we're going to keep it loose, and I'm going to keep it brief, I promise. Thank you for joining us tonight for this really special program with artist TT Takemoto and cultural studies scholar Eve Oishi, presented in partnership with Stanford's Bill Lane Center for the American West. Thank you, Bill Lane Center, for partnering with us on this really fun event. The event is organized in conjunction with the Cantor's current exhibition, TT Takemoto, Remembering in the Absence of Memory. If you haven't seen this show yet, you are doubly in luck. The Cantor has recently announced extended hours, and we're open until 8 p.m. tonight and every Thursday going forward. The cafe is also open late, has a really nice new dinner menu. Okay, yeah, we're awake. But additionally, I'm excited to share with you that we've extended the run of the show through April 6th. So you don't have to choose between dinner and a show tonight. You can do both. So as I said, I'll keep my introductory remarks brief, and please note there will be time for questions at the end of the program. Before I introduce the event and our speakers, I'd like to play Stanford's land acknowledgement.
Stanford sits on the ancestral lands of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe.
This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people.
Consistent with our values of community and inclusion,
We have a responsibility to acknowledge, honor, and make visible
the university's relationship to Native peoples.
Okay, thank you for your attention. So TT Takemoto is a queer Japanese-American artist exploring hidden dimensions of same-sex intimacy in Asian American history. Takemoto interacts with found film footage, and archival materials through performance and labor-intensive processes of experimental filmmaking, as well as handmade art and craft forms. The Cantor's current exhibition, which you can see a shot of on the screen here, includes 2 of Takemoto's video works, along with 2 related series of handcrafted objects, all of which showcase their interrelated and various haptic, to use the keyword of the night, working processes. By engaging with tactile and sensory aspects of queer histories, Takemoto conjures up immersive fantasies honoring Asian Americans who lived, loved, and worked together. In the present exhibition, the works draw on the archives of queer or gender nonconforming Japanese American individuals who were imprisoned in U.S. incarceration camps during World War II. The series of handmade objects in the show, such as this one that's on the screen right now, in particular evoke arts and crafts made by Japanese Americans in the camps, and so examine how handcraft and making do with available materials can play a role in processing traumatic experiences and histories. One such work, this one here, right there in the front, is a striking installation of handcrafted kokeshi figures made in glass and clay-rich earth from nearby Montalvo Arts Center. This work is making its debut here at the Cantor and serves as the departure point for tonight's event. So tonight we'll begin, hi everybody, welcome, come in, there's lots of seats. We'll begin with a demonstration by Takemoto of the Japanese art form of dorodango, which is part of the method used in the creation of this work. In this method, earth and water are combined, molded, and polished to create delicate, shiny spheres. Then, while Takemoto and Oishi are in discussion, we collectively in the audience will continue to polish these spheres made with earth collected here on Stanford's campus, which I believe TT is going to tell us a little more about during the presentation. Throughout the course of the discussion, you'll see clips from On the Line, one of the video works on view in the show, which you can see there in the screen. Excuse me. As well as clips from Sordid Love and After Bed, two additional amazing films by TT that are handmade and cameraless films, and they're discussed in Eve Oishi's current book in progress, Ruined Matter, Haptic Processing, and Spectral Cinema. Oishi is an associate professor in Claremont Graduate University's Cultural Studies Department and an independent film and video curator. Their primary research interests include Asian American cultural studies, independent and experimental film and video, transnational media, and gender and queer theory. In their in-progress book project, they introduce a concept of haptic processing, which goes beyond previous scholarship into the sensual, affective, or haptic experience of viewing film, to consider how the process of film and video production can also be sensual, affective, and haptic, how it can constitute a form of care that involves touch and touching, and how it can fragment or distort representations of history and relate to diasporic and queer experience and subjectivity. Tonight's program promises to be a really dynamic peek into the work of two incredible scholars and creatives. And in the interest of time, I will forego reading the very impressive list of accolades, but more information is on our website if you're curious, in addition to things that you can read and things that you can see by both of our speakers. So please help me now in welcoming TT and Eve.
Yes. Okay, hi everyone. Can you hear me okay with this mic? Okay, great. I'm so excited to be here. I'm going to give you a little preview, and then I'm going to do a little demo, like a cooking show, and then we're going to have a conversation. So that's the order of things. So tonight I'm focusing on the process of making these forms, which are inspired by kokeshi dolls. Some of you might be familiar with these dolls. They're typically made of wood. Their origin is in Japan in the 1600s. Oftentimes they would be at different hot springs, spas, otherwise known as onsen, and they were kind of like souvenirs that might be brought back from relatives or your parents if they were visiting a different onsen. And each town or village would have a different style or approach. In the context of my exhibition, I'm thinking of these forms that are made both of glass and of pressed and polished earth as figures that may hold the memories of the wartime incarceration camps during World War II, especially because many of the camps were sited on dried up lakes or riverbeds, and so they were known to be very hot, very windy, very dusty. So it's as if the dust is coming together, that dust and heat and touch is coming together to kind of hold the memories of those spaces. Okay, and so I'm using the process of dorodango, which is the art of polished earth. It literally kind of translates as mud dumpling. And it sometimes is practiced by young children who are making the most of playing with mud. So you're basically gathering earth and shaping it into the form of a ball and then polishing it with your hands. So this is an unfired clay process. So I learned from my clay-savvy ceramics colleagues that you can harvest wild clay at any place that is near water. So all earth has a certain amount of clay content, but especially earth that is near the water, so either a riverbed or the ocean, is more clay rich. So I started off at Fort Funston, which some of you may know. It's a great place to bring dogs, and you go down a big cliff and the dogs play and the sand is black and it's really fun. There's a way to test the clay content. You kind of dig it up and you squeeze it in your hand and it has a certain feel. So anyways, that was the first place I harvested wild clay. But you also may know that you have to walk up a lot of stairs to get back up the top of the cliff, and it's kind of difficult. So after hauling lots in a backpack, I had the pleasure of being at an artist residency in Saratoga at Montalvo, which also has a villa. They have 10 artist studios on this beautiful hill mountain right near a lot of creeks, so lots of water that flows. And the bonus is that there are tons of gophers that kick up dirt. So usually you see these dirt piles and you think, oh, that might be a bother. But in this case, gophers are the best artist assistants ever because they're kicking up the piles and all I have to do is scoop it up and then bring it into the studio. For today's dirt project, I worked with Christina Linden and Kwang Mi, and we went out into Stanford and were able to collect the clay-rich earth of the Stanford campus, which is also quite meaningful. One, because it feels meaningful to use the earth of this place, where we are standing, and also because the land of the Stanford campus was worked upon by Chinese immigrants who also planted many of the beautiful trees that are here. So just thinking about that history and legacy in terms of Asian American history. The process is you gather the dirt, you thank the gophers, you dry out the dirt by putting it in the oven for an hour, and then you take out the big blocks of rocks, and then you sift it in various sifters that you get from Goodwill, or you steal from your kitchen, but I didn't really do that. I got this one from Goodwill. That's my partner, so we don't tell her what I actually took from the kitchen. So this is from Goodwill, and you do various coarsenesses, right? So I had like 3 different ones of various kinds of coarseness. You can also use a screen, and then you make up a recipe. And so I tried lots of different recipes, and I am going to do a dorodango recipe for you today, and I'm going to ask you to switch over I was going to go through a couple more slides. Sorry, I forgot. Okay, so this is, the process. So shaping it into balls, which I'm going to do live, and then making lots and lots of trial and error, and lots of mistakes. So because these are not fired, it means that they're quite strong and sturdy, but if you drop it, it will break and then it just becomes dirt again. So the great thing is you break something and then you just make it again. So it's like a never-ending process. I wanted to show you some failed attempts at the body part. I thought I could use the rammed earth method that they used in buildings sometimes, but that totally didn't work. So I wanted to show you how things don't work. And I finally started to use a similar approach as I'm using for the dorodango to approach making the bodies. And you see that each body has a divot at the top. So the forms that you see in the exhibition are actually the dorodango head is resting on the body part, much to the chagrin of all the exhibition people. And we can't even put these forms in our house because we have cats. So this is actually one of the few places I've been able to see the installation without cats. And they are being held together with a little bit of exhibition curator's special wax or something. Al probably knows what the secret sauce is there. But anyway, so this is the first iteration of the forms. When I was at Montalvo, I made about 130 over a 3-week period, and you see 50 on display in the exhibition alongside approximately 50 glass forms that were made at Public Glass that I commissioned the amazing artisans there for. Okay, so now we're going to switch over to, yeah, okay, so this is the Julia Child moment. Here we go. Okay, so what we have here, this is the original-ish dirt. It's been slightly, slightly massaged, rollered with the best rolling pin that you can use for dirt, which is an empty wine bottle. You could use a full one too, but it's lighter if it's empty. And then this is what I call coarse earth, fine earth, and sand. So I have a little recipe. I've been practicing for a week, so I'm going to use 2.5 scoops of coarse earth. You can tell this is super scientific. This could have been a shot glass. I don't know. I don't think so, but anyways, okay. And then 1.5 fine. This is why I'm not a baker, because in baking you have to be super exact, and when you make a mud dumpling you don't have to be exact. Okay, that's about 1/2, and then 1/2 of sand. Oops, okay, sorry. Yep, sure. Okay, and then you guys see this? Okay, and then you mix it all around. And then, so this is just water. 1 1/3. Okay. And then you mix it up, and then this should bring you back to childhood because it should resemble the consistency of brownie mix. But don't eat it. Okay. Let's see, I should probably tell you something interesting right now. Like if I was Julia Child, then I would be drinking that wine because she always liked to drink while cooking. But I'm not going to do that. Okay, I'm just going to keep mixing and mixing. Okay, so then once it looks like brownie mix, am I still on screen? Yeah, okay, a little bit. Then you grab it and very scientifically make some ball shapes. So I did practice my measurements all week to make exactly 3 balls. Let's see. But actually today, they don't have to be perfect. So what I do is I pre-shape them in the ugly ball form. This is the ugly ball form. Okay. And as you can see, these are all different sizes, like mama bear, papa bear. But, and then it helps if you slap them around quite a bit. It's, when you're making 130, it's good to listen to a book on tape because it takes a long time. But when I practiced, it only took 11 minutes to make 3. So, but only for this stage. But then I'm going to do the fake cooking show thing where you, okay, but anyways. All right, so you get it into a kind of a, kind of a ballish shape. You don't worry too much. And then you get any kind of little cup or lid from a water bottle, just something. So, okay, 1. And it's good to give a little squeeze too, because you're kind of squeezing the water out. You're also trying to activate the clay content. So the more you touch the clay and roll it around in your hands, the clay is actually moving towards your skin. I don't know why. Is it the heat of your hand? I don't know, but ceramics people in the audience probably know the answer and I don't. Okay, and then one more. Okay, let's just pretend this one looks really good, even though it doesn't look that good. Okay, there we go. Okay, so you make your rough 3 dorodango ball forms, and then these are known as cores. So this is the core of the dorodango, and then you let it rest. Some people like to let it rest in a plastic bag or covered. Some people hang it in a plastic bag. I just usually let it sit around anywhere from 2 hours to 6 hours, maybe overnight. And then you can start interacting with this dorodango and getting it into its shiny, smooth form. So this is when you do the fake cooking show thing, like this is the uncooked ones, and then bing, it's like 6 hours later. And I'll put this on the ground. So I pre-made dorodango. So, and I started on Sunday. So 6 are from Sunday, 6 are from Monday, 6 are from Tuesday, and 6 are from, you can take now. Just hold for a second, but yeah, I mean, you can just sit, you can just, okay. So, okay, yeah, and then this is Tuesday, yesterday. You can actually keep interacting with a dorodango for, maybe 4 or 5 days, maybe a week. And the way you're interacting with them will change as each day passes. It also depends on how dry it is, those sorts of things. But initially, so for instance, a quite dry one, I've already spent quite a long time rolling this around in my hand, sometimes adding a little more dry of the fine stuff. And then there are other ways you can interact with them. For instance, if it's on the drier stage, you can put it in a bowl and you can spin it around like this. This is fun, and and also it helps you make a sphere shape. And this technique is really great when you're using a larger form that's like bigger than your hand. So you can see in the exhibition there are ones that are closer to the size of an orange, maybe a small grapefruit. And so in that case, I had a giant salad bowl. And then I was kind of, woo, then you try to hope that it doesn't, swimming around. And then, let me do one more demo with this. And then the other thing you can do is you can use things like cloth or plastic bags. And we have a whole collection of different types of plastic bags, which you start fetishizing. And then you can actually polish it with the plastic bag. So it actually starts getting more and more shiny with the plastic bag. The other thing that people do is when you're using the fine dust, you get just a little bit of dust on your hand, and then you're sort of working it in, and you're polishing it at the same time. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to hand these out into the audience, and I don't need this demo one anymore, so go ahead. So there's only 24, and there's a lot more of you. So, I just recommend that maybe each row takes one, and then you can, roll it around in your hand. You can use your thumb on it if you want. As you're doing that, and then you should pass them around to other people, and then you should pass them forwards and backwards. I wouldn't throw them too much, but that was good. I've never seen someone juggle them. I don't recommend that. But you might be very talented, and you could probably do that. But you'll notice that some are colder, and then some are smoother, some are wetter, some are more dry. So anyway, so this is like a communal polishing interactive situation. And your hands shouldn't get too dirty, but you might get a little bit of dust on you. And yeah, so just enjoy. And then we just are going to encourage you to interact with them as we move into our conversation. Okay, sound good? Anyone have any questions, quick questions about this process? Oh, yeah, okay.
Does the material need to be dirt and clay, or can you use any material?
You mean like bananas?
Yeah, like can you make one of these with a banana or something like that?
No, so I don't think you can make it with a banana, but
Okay.
I mean, it's interesting that what I learned is that any dirt, like from the ground, has at least a tiny bit of clay content. So like earth is made up of rocks and things, and then it has some clay bits, and then water. And so there's also a way to isolate the clay layer. If you take a bucket of dirt and you just put it, you fill the bucket with water, then you stir it up really well, and then you let it settle, the clay will actually rise to the top, the clay content. So the more clay content your dirt has, your earth has, the more smooth your dorodango will come out.
Thank you.
Yeah. There was one other question over here. Yeah.
This is fun. Do you ever come across and take out animal material, species, insects?
Yeah,
birds?
yeah. So there's all kinds of interesting things in the earth. And so, that's like the first process.
And I will use this opportunity to express thanks to our colleagues in the Stanford Archaeology Department. The earth you are handling had to be treated in like a sub-zero freezer for 3 months before we were allowed to bring it into the museum. So I can guarantee you there are no living organisms of any kind in this particular dirt. This is not a standard process for dorodango-making in general, but we are not allowed to bring organic material into the museum unless it's guaranteed sterile. So thank you, archaeology friends, with their special specimen freezer.
Yeah. So so you are touching Stanford Earth. You are interacting with Stanford Earth. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'm going to take this question if that's okay. Yes.
Okay, Thank you. Did you notice any differences between like the various dirt from like the sites you visited?
Yeah. So, I mean, some people do this as a kind of like a way to honor the different places that they visit. But each earth, each amount of dirt has a different color, a different texture. So people who do this as a practice might have an entire, living room full of dorodango, and each one will represent a different location that they've been. So for instance, at Fort Funston, for those of you who have been there, there's a lot of metal content in the earth, and so those dorodango come out very dark brown. This one, it's probably a little bit darker than the ones that are in the exhibition, which are from Saratoga. Do you have a question? Yeah.
Do you find that you need to use the, I guess sizes in this ratio, or can you do it with clay straight from the earth?
I mean, in terms of recipes? You could make up any recipe that you want. So I just had to measure things so that I could do this demonstration, and it's trial and error, right? So I needed to come up with a recipe that I thought would work, so I could do it in 11 minutes. But when I'm doing it by myself, I'm just,
okay.
You know what I mean? Like I'm not really measuring, I'm just, But I didn't want you to have to be here forever for that. Yeah. But anyone can make up their own recipe.
Okay, I'm going to be the timekeeper a little bit because we have a wonderful discussion to move on to. I will re-emphasize that there will be time for additional questions at the end of the program. So we're not done with question time, but I just want to make sure we also have some time to hear from Eve and TT. Thank you.
Okay. I also have questions about dorodango. Maybe we'll get to it later, but moving on to the next part of this, I want to first of all thank Christina and Maggie and Kwangmi and Vivian for all of the work that for inviting us and inviting me and all the work that you've done in setting this up. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. And so I am a scholar of film and video, and have been familiar with TT's work for a long time in that context. And I have also been writing about their work, and some of the remarks that I'm going to begin with right now before we just get into questions and conversation comes from a chapter in which I write about TT's work, and I introduce this concept of haptic processing. And just to give you a little bit of background on this term, I draw it from two works in particular. The first one is the film scholar Laura Marks, whose concept of haptic visuality has been central to connecting the visual components of film and video to the body's other senses, particularly touch. And I'll just read a quote from her. She says, "While optical perception privileges the representational power of the image, haptic perception privileges the material presence of the image. Touch is a sense located on the surface of the body. Thinking of cinema as haptic is only a step toward considering the ways cinema appeals to the body as a whole." So she's really interested in the experience of viewing film and video and the kind of interaction that one has with the screen as feeling like touch and kind of activating other kinds of connections to bodily senses. So I adapt this concept of haptic visuality and the viewing experience to thinking about production and to think about the way in which film and video makers, the sort of haptic, tactile quality of making film and producing film. And think about the way in which that often constitutes a form of care that is also tactile and involves touch and touching. And so for that, I also draw on Stefano Harney and Fred Moten's concept of hapticality from this book, The Undercommons, in which they theorize this idea of hapticality as, quote, the touch of the undercommons, the interiority of sentiment, the feel that what is to come is here. And as Rizvana Bradley clarifies, Harney and Moten's concept of hapticality is an explicitly minoritarian aesthetic and a political formation, and a figuration of alterity that simultaneously marks the overlap of and break between thought and feeling. So I thought that was a really great way to connect what we just saw, the workshop on making dorodango, and this kind of connection to older forms of craft and handicraft and craft work with your filmmaking process. And so I wanted to, this was a great opportunity to get you to talk about how you make films. We're going to be talking about three, but really deeply about two pieces of TT's that use different kinds of processes, but really engage kind of analog, very, very physical ways of making film. And so, okay, the first one is a film called On the Line that is a great connection because it actually features dorodango and kokeshi dolls and some of them, the actual materials that we've talked about, but also is made with a lot of the sort of strategies that kind of connect to what we've just heard in the first part of this in the workshop. So I'm going to ask TT for you to introduce the film, maybe have a short clip, and just to talk a little bit about the process of making it.
Sure. So I think I'm just going to actually start by playing the clip, and then I'll give you some context for it. But just to say that this is a clip that's an experimental film. It's non-narrative. It doesn't have a strong storyline. It's supposed to give you a sense of a particular time and place. So just allow yourself to be immersed in time and place. So this is a film that is inspired by history. It is set in the 1930s in a tuna cannery in San Diego. And some of you may know that tuna fishing was actually a practice that was introduced to the US, the West Coast, through Japanese American fishermen. So previously in California, the fisher people would go out and catch smaller fish like anchovies or sardines, predominantly in nets. And it was the Japanese American fishermen from Japan who brought the technique of bamboo pole fishing. So in this case, they were able to locate a school of tuna, because they travel in large schools of fish, and they would do what's called chumming, which is they are throwing bits of fish guts out into the water, and then the tuna start jumping at anything that moves. And then the fishermen were able to throw out their line and use a barbless hook. So it was a hook that didn't have a barb. And sometimes there'd be 5 men on, they'd each have their own pole, but it would go down to a single line, a single hook. So it would depend on how heavy the fish is, right? So they'd pull up these fish and then they would throw them into the ship. And they could do this at such a rapid rate. They sometimes described it as silver petals flying through the air, right? So you see these giant fish flying through the air. And so there were tuna canneries both in San Diego and in the Los Angeles area. And when the men were out fishing, the women, Japanese American women, were mostly working in the canneries. They lived in what was called fish camp, which was very meager housing shelters on the dock. And then in the cannery itself, they were interacting with the fish parts, so they were doing the dirtiest work. So it was women from Japan and women from Mexico were given the dirtier work, and then the maybe whiter presenting women would be putting the labels on the can, so the kind of cleaner work. So I started to think about the lives of these women going from fish camp and being surrounded by water, and then going into the space of the assembly line where they're surrounded by the sounds of machinery and actually becoming part of the assembly line itself. I was also inspired by Isa Shimoda, who was what we might think of now as a kind of butch or gender non-conforming or masculine of center, or anyways, that type of person, who owned a tiny little diner that was literally between fish camp and the cannery. And it was the only place, only business in the whole area. She was quite distinctive. She was known for her sort of masculine presentation. She was an expert at naginata, which is a sword-based martial art practiced by women in Japan. And it looks like she performed at one of the world's fairs in San Diego. Legend has it that, or rumor has it, that she would challenge men to sword fights, but would often lose. She rolled her own cigarettes. And so I started to think about her restaurant, her diner, as this place where the women could go after work and could socialize and dance, enjoy Japanese food, maybe have crushes on each other. So just kind of speculating about it as this kind of world for women. So the film is trying to create that environment or reimagine the sights and sounds and maybe even the smells of that space. The other thing that's distinctive about Isa Shimoda is that she has 2 sets of wartime records, one identifying her as female and the other as male. So this is quite unique. There isn't a lot of evidence that she was transgender in the way that we think of it today, but it is quite possible that when she was leaving the prison camp, in the exit interview, You know, if you're interviewing someone in person, you think you know their gender, you don't often ask them what their gender is. So that could be one of the ways that she was identified. But to me, it was incredible to learn about her history, because then all of a sudden I had a, you know, gender nonconforming, butch, auntie, yeah, ancestor somewhere out there. So you know, that's what I was kind of thinking of. And yeah, and then I think you had some.
Yes, and so, well, I mean, I just from the clip that we saw, there's all this kind of resonances with what you just showed us, because it made me realize that, well, dango is actually it's a food item, right? It's like a dessert, or it's a snack that's made out of pounded rice. And so, and you see hands preparing food in ways that look very similar to the cooking show that we just saw. And of course, the sea life is an old lesbian trope of female sexuality. So there's a lot of,
Anything that does this is kind of a giveaway. Okay.
So yeah, so all of the things that we see, we see all these hands, that are making food, that are processing the fish, that are, participating in this kind of quotidian activities of daily life, both on the, in the assembly line and in the factory, and then in these all-female spaces. It kind of really pulls up, I'm just thinking about the kind of idea of pulling up the clay content. It pulls out the sort of homoerotic elements of these homosocial spaces that might not have been evident in the record, in the archival record, or we just might see traces of it. And your work kind of makes that resonant through this sense of tactility, which is really connected to something that's not as obvious until you hear about it, which is your actual filmmaking process. And so I would love for you to share with us some of how you actually made the films, how you got the images to look the way that they did.
Sure, yeah. So I used some archival footage, and that footage was mostly home movies that were shot by Japanese Americans. There are from the Center for Asian American Media, known as CAM. They have an incredible home movie collection. So it's a collection of home movies from Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and they do this incredible service where you can bring them your old Super 8, 16 millimeter films. They will clean them, digitize them, and then make them available to the public, but also give you a copy of your digital imagery, because most of us don't have a way to look at our own films. So you get your films back cleaned, you get the digital file, and then you can determine how much you want your films, your family films, to be available to the public. And they're very generous with artists, so they allow artists to interact with the archive, and with permission of the different family estates and these sorts of things. So the imagery, all of the imagery that you see of women laughing and dancing, so you can kind of see this image of a woman, she has like a carnation, that's from the home movie collection. Also, the fisherman is also from home movies. You might be able to tell that this blue image is an upside down and inverted image of the tuna fisherman. So in the film, even though it goes by really quickly, everything that has to do with fishing is upside down and inverted, because I was thinking of the men as out to sea and the other side of the world, if the world was flat. And then, the space of women interacting would be in these kind of sepia tones. So I was thinking of like palettes and colors. And then I'm also doing a lot of layering. So I'm layering hand-shot footage that I shot with the Bolex, 16 millimeter, and layering that on top of some of that archival footage. The other thing I did is I visited a lot of fish markets. I went to aquariums, I went to the seaside, and I was doing a lot of recording of sounds. And then I was buying, squid and different sorts of things. And it's slightly embarrassing, but maybe you'll appreciate it. So this is actually under our kitchen table, which is really small. It's like this big. And I just made the tiniest black box you could make, where you just put a blanket over your kitchen table and then you crawl under it. And I have a piece of glass that's a frame from the thrift store. I have it at a 45-degree angle, and then I'm basically sliding fish guts down the glass or cleaning the fish with my hands, and then I have a camera shooting it from this way. So again, thank you to my partner, who's very generous and doesn't mind when I destroy the house and it smells like fish guts for weeks. But that's what I did. And then you can see, so maybe you can see this, but that's an image of one of the octopuses or squid. It was a squid sliding down really slowly like this. Yeah, so that was sliding down the glass. And then there's 3 or 4 other images there. So you could do this at home too, if you have a really good relationship or you live at home alone. And then I was processing footage at home in the bathroom using what's called the jam it in a can method. So you take the film out of the Bolex, you shove it in a metal can, you put the developer in it, and then you shake it up, and it creates these patterns on the film itself. So that arc is, and you see that kind of rectangle there? That rectangle is the sprocket hole of a 16-millimeter film that has been smashed on top of another piece of film and created a kind of like bruise, or you know what I mean? It's like a little cyanotyper. It's like not allowing that piece of the film to be developed. So I use these kind of glitches or mistakes as another way to I don't know, signal handmadeness, but also, as a metaphor for the absences or the gaps in history and memory.
And also, I find it very queer because it's film touching itself. And so, yeah. So the idea of like homoeroticism without humans, but with actual film, it is just this is one of my favorite parts of making this film. But also, I think, you were talking about historical absences and gaps. I mean, so much of your work is about kind of interacting with archival artifacts and traces that are partial and that are, you kind of have to interpret them, and then you have to kind of speculate, and you have to fill in gaps, and you have to, create the larger context out of the tools that you have. And so, to me, a lot of the kind of visual effects of these processes are really capturing that, as you say, the kind of all of the filters between things that what actually happened and our ability to access it or not access it, or even, how something is remembered never the way that it actually happened.
Okay, so, and this is an in-process storyboard. So in the process of editing, I'm editing digitally. I'm using a lot of different layers. And so sometimes, when I'm dealing with abstraction, I get a little bit confused. So at a certain point in the process, I will just start taking frame grabs and print them out at Walgreens when they're having a 10-cent sale. And then I'll put them on the wall and start moving them around. So this is just one way that I'm thinking through pattern and transitions. Another thing I do is I work in a sketchbook. I often this is almost like a reverse storyboard. So again, I do some storyboarding at the beginning, but it's more in the middle stages of editing that I really need to do the storyboarding, because I'm thinking about the movement. So I like make little arrows for myself. In this film, I'm thinking a lot about having the imagery move across the screen as if it's from the point of view of someone who's on the assembly line, and everything is moving across you, and then maybe swirling around. So like I was thinking of the film itself as a machine of movement. So it's these kinds of sketchbook images that help out with that. And then I can't remember what's next. Oh, okay, are we ready to move on?
Yeah, yes, I think we are ready to move on. And actually, we should probably talk kind of quickly.
Okay.
Okay, so this one is another one of my favorite. They're all my favorites, but if you read the title aloud, it's Sordid Love. So there's a play on words, and this is using a very different kind of haptic processing to different effects, and I'll ask you to introduce that and talk about your process for that.
Sure. So I'm going to start off with a clip again. So this film is really different in its form in that it is a single source film. I'm using found footage. So that I went to Scrap, which is a creative reuse amazing center in San Francisco, and I found the last reel of a 35 millimeter film by John Woo called The Last Hurrah for Chivalry in 1979. So this would be, like if you're in a movie house, they have 7 or 8 or 9 reels of film that they're showing. And then sometimes rather than sending them back to the distributor, sometimes they destroy them because they're heavy. And so sometimes they end up in the trash. So I got this last reel. And it's 35 millimeter, and I was really interested in the 2 protagonist characters who were like best buddies and then end up betraying each other, and then in the end, one dies for the other, which is total homo.
It's on Criterion Channel. If anyone wants to watch it, you can actually see it, and it's really good. It's
so good.
Yeah, I mean, it's John. It's very John Woo, but it's you know, his costume drama, martial arts, early John Woo before he gets into, you know, his gangster era. So, but a lot of the same themes of like male love and violence and death and yeah. So.
Yeah, so I was interested, so I was trying to figure out how do I get this imagery onto 16 millimeter. And so I figured out a way to scrape and lift the emulsion off of the 35 millimeter, 1 centimeter at a time, and stick it onto 16 millimeter with nail polish and clear tape. So here you're seeing, so that's a close-up of the 16 millimeter. So you can see, you can only get half the frame at a time. And those little rectangles are the sprocket holes. There's some nail polish there. And then you're seeing a lot of the jagged edges from the X-Acto knife blade. In the middle, you're seeing the viewer. So I'm using like a 16 millimeter viewer to just get a sense of the imagery. And then at Montalvo, which is an artist residency, I was able to work on an outdoor table, like a DIY bench, which is very handy when you're dealing with nail polish because it's so smelly. So, and I think I have one more image, yeah.
Yeah, so I think I was really lucky enough to do a studio visit with TT where they showed me literally, like, I think I got to scrape off one of the frames, and it's with an X-Acto knife, so it's very difficult to do and takes a lot of trial and error. But seeing the final result, to me, one of the things that happens is that, film is designed to hide the movements between frames, right? It's this illusion of perpetual motion when in fact it's still a bunch of still frames. And so by kind of interrupting that flow, by scraping off each individual frame and treating it, it interrupts that, and it kind of fractures it, as you can see the end result. But then again, in a very different way, these other kinds of affective registers emerge. And so, not everyone thinks about, I'm a big John Woo fan, and I'm a big John Woo fan because of the kind of homoerotics of it. But that's not necessarily something that's people really think about. But I think once you kind of really slow down the frames and fracture it like that, that kind of comes out. And also I think you emphasize that, you really enhance that through the editing, through the pacing, through the sound design. There's a way in which it really takes on this, especially if you see the whole thing, this kind of building climax, what's the resolution, where they, this satisfaction at the end, which is, this still is such a John Woo still, right? The two men, one, crawling to each other, one dying or dead. So maybe can you talk about how you see that, your relationship to that, to the queer content of the work, and how you see your process as kind of connecting to that?
Yeah, I mean, because the process is so time consuming, I'm really just focusing on a few different scenes that I think are particularly, charged with that kind of energy. And when you're making it, you can spend days, weeks on this footage, but you really don't know what the imagery is going to look like until it goes through the projector or it's been digitized, and then you can actually slow down the frames and see it. So it's a way of spending time with imagery that I love, but also allowing the process itself to disrupt it. And you're literally touching the things that you love and want to hold on to, but also at the same time letting it go. And you're destroying it at the same time that you're making it. So those sorts of things.
Yeah, I was talking about your process with an archivist, a film archivist. And there was this look of horror on her face, like, oh my God, how can you do that to film? Because there's this very precious relationship to film objects that need to be preserved at all cost. And so I think you're doing something very different with the film, which is, you're ruining it, but it's a very, I talk about it as a form of care. It's a very loving relationship to it. It's one of kind of honoring it and also, respecting it in some way.
So
we are at time. I'm going to ask you a quick question, if I could, maybe just really quickly, since we have I see 1 minute left on our time, which is, I know you're continuing this process of this emulsion-lift process, ongoing. Can you talk about what you're currently working on?
So a more recent film that I've made is called After Bed, which is using the same technique, but it's focusing on footage that was from a film from 1968 by James Broughton called The Bed. And it's made up of a lot of vignettes of mostly naked people frolicking in Marin County. But there's only one Asian woman in this film, and she is eating a cracker and smoking a joint. And I became sort of really interested in her face, her movement. And then also you can see that the footage is kind of red. As film ages, red is the strongest color. So it's the one that's left as the other colors start to fade away. So I was interested in this sort of predominantly red image of this woman's face. And there's lots of other things about it, but yeah. And then I think we are that image up for the Q&A.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. My eye contact was, please don't not play the After Bed clip. So I'm glad you did that. Thank you so much. I do have a question just about the complexity of the affective register that comes out in these works. And I was really drawn to the quote that Eve includes at the close of the section of the draft of the book chapter that I got to read, a quote of something that TT has said. While queer speculation can help us reimagine social histories by decentering narratives we presume to be fact, there remains deep sorrow in enacting illegitimate, forgotten, and traumatic histories. And so I did want to ask you if you could reflect for a moment about this question of how the work allows you to kind of touch the untouchable, as Eve frames it in the chapter, and how we can think about this as a relationship maybe to the spectral and to ghosts.
Do you want me to take that first? Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, the reason why I love labor-intensive work is that there's just a lot of time. Like you spend time with archival material, you spend time with imagery that you love, and you spend time thinking about histories. And, you know, for me, especially queer Japanese American histories of gender nonconforming people, we don't have a lot of actual stories. So just imagining what it might feel like to have those kinds of ancestors in our lives, but also trying to imagine what their lives might have been, but also what it would mean to open up a space for them, for their fantasies, right? So imagining space for them in the past, in the future, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. I know we had so many questions before. I was hoping maybe we could bring up the lights. And then I'd love to take questions from the audience. you can still ask the questions you had about Dorodango earlier. Too.
Thank you so much, TT. This has been really fun and really beautiful. I guess sort of in the mode of haptic processing, this has been very much sort of a community experience as we're passing the dorodangos around. I think film, especially in the archival sense, always feels like a translational act when you're taking these past stories and sort of adapting them through your own lens. And all of the things you've been talking about haptically feel very communal, and I was just wondering, is there an aspect of the filmmaking process and that translation that also sort of maps communally, even though you're like one distinct artist?
Yeah, thank you. That's such a great question. I mean, the super labor-intensive parts, I'm going to stand up so I can see you. The super labor-intensive parts of my practice are super solo, you know, because I'm not going to ask anyone else to sit next to me for all those hours doing all the things. But you know, I think there are other aspects of practice, especially when you make film, then you're sharing it with the world, like in film festivals and things like that. And that's where, you know, the conversations really happen. So if, you know, when you make experimental films, and hopefully they're usually short, so it means that you're in a program with other filmmakers, and then you're having this kind of conversation with them, both on the screen, but then also perhaps in a Q&A. So those kinds of conversations feel really important. And then also there's opportunities to have screenings or presentations with various communities. So, you know, my Asian American community, my Asian American queer community, queer communities, and the kinds of conversations that you might have with each of those aspects of your community is interesting to me. Yeah. Do you still have a question? Oh.
Is it on? My question is pretty simple. I was wondering if when the dorodango starts cracking, if you can just add water, or do you have to start over?
Depends on how bad the crack is.
Two questions.
Yeah. So, I mean, I have tried to, like, if it just cracks a little bit, you can try to shove some dirt in there or some mud and then hope for the best and then maybe polish it over. But once it starts cracking, it could crack in half, you know. So you might just set it aside or...
Is there a secret to prevent it from cracking? No.
No cats? No, I don't know.
And one other question. Have you tried adding pigment or mica or chalk to it?
I haven't done that very much, but a lot of people do. So they'll either add pigments or different types of clay, either to the main mix or on the final layers. And yeah, people do really interesting things with, some people wrap string around it and then add more layers and then pull the string off and then add another layer inside the spot where the string used to be. You know, there's all kinds of really cool things you can do. Yeah.
Considering the dorodango kind of represent like the people and the memories kind of associated with them, do you ever name your dorodangos, or do you have a favorite one that you've made?
I have more favorite ones, you know, and then there's problem dorodango that just like won't get smooth, or, you know what I'm saying? I don't typically name them, and I don't really think of them as people, but they might be more like when you used to have a pet rock, that used to be a thing a long, long time ago. I think people name those too, yeah. So, but no, I don't usually name them.
I gotta put googly eyes if I
Yeah, that's it. Well, in regular kokeshi dolls, you know, they actually have eyes, and yeah, so yeah.
And what is the history of this practice? I mean, is this just like a, how long have people been doing this?
I mean, I think folks have been doing it in Japan for quite a while, and it is an activity that you can do with kids. I mean, obviously, it's a very inexpensive, time-consuming activity that is super fun. So But yeah, I mean, I don't know that much more. I do know that other artists in the U.S. have taken it on as practices, and again, thinking about earth and travel and different things like that.
Have you found that like adding larger impurities or coarser earth to the center or just in the mix will help the integrity, or is it kind of like make it crack more? Or do you ever think about like, oh, what am I adding to this? Or like, I don't know, the value of adding foreign objects to a ball of earth that is you don't really have like a kind of full claim over? I don't know. Sorry, but I don't know. What
No, that's a great question. I mean, I think you can make a dorodango out of anything you want, you know? So
Except bananas.
except for bananas, maybe. I mean, as long as it has enough earth, you could probably throw a little bit of banana peel in there. But yeah, I mean, some people use things like hay or grass inside the core to give it strength. I use sand to give it a bit more coarseness, but if you go online, you can see people use all different kinds of techniques. I think one thing that's difficult, if you don't sift it enough, then when you're polishing it, you know, where the bigger rock pieces are, you won't be able to get it very smooth. But if you're fine with that, I mean, there's also some beautifully lumpy dorodango that are out there too. So there's so many different, but I don't think there's no rules. You know, it's a mud dumpling, so like do whatever you want. Yeah. Maybe I think in the back. One more.
Thank you so much. I was just curious, like, what kind of other like art and artists shaped you growing up and like forming your identity and forming your practice?
Oh, wow, that's a really good one. I love the work of Sandra Ibarra, who is a locally based artist. My training is actually in painting and performance art, and she's a queer Latinx performer who does things like dresses like a dominatrix and then has a piñata donkey and then interacts with it in inappropriate ways. In a kind of piñata way. And to me, her work is so joyful and hilarious, but also is approaching stereotypes, you know, in a really provocative and compelling way. So that's one example.
So TT, drawing all the sort of through lines of your practice. So when we go to see the exhibition, obviously we'll see on the line, we'll see the sculptures, but we'll also see Looking for Jiro. Can you tell us a little bit more about what we'll see when we have the opportunity to encounter that video work?
Sure, yeah. So Looking for Jiro is the second video in the exhibition. It is a musical mashup performance video. It's ABBA and Madonna. It's set in the incarceration camps, and I am performing in the character of Jiro Onuma, who was a gay man who was incarcerated at the age of 38. And there's very little known about him except for the fact that he worked in the mess hall and he was obsessed with muscle men. And there are some really amazing archival images of men baking bread in the camps, in the mess halls. And so I started off doing a live performance where I'm performing in his character, and and his character is making these loaves of bread in the shape of muscles, and then fisting them, and then becoming the muscle man that he desires. It was originally as a film performance, which is a live performance with film projection in the background. So all of the film projection is US war propaganda footage that was originally shot to show Japanese Americans as potential laborers towards the end of the war, when we were having a labor shortage, and they thought, oh, we could hire Japanese Americans for factory work or for agricultural work. So most of the imagery is showing people at work. And so, my film is about the labor of desire rather than the labor of compliance or conformity. So, it's a funny piece, it's a queer piece, it's, and it's in there, yeah. Thank you, thanks for that question.
Eve, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about your book, the current working title, and maybe a little bit about the framework that you developed there.
Sure, thank you. It's currently called, hopefully will not change, it's currently called Partial Form, An Experimental History of Asian American Film and Video. And it looks at experimental film and video by Asian, Pacific Americans, diasporic Americans from the silent era to the present, and thinks about that category very broadly, partly thinking about the way that category, the category of Asian American, is itself being mutually constructed along with kind of evolving film and video technologies. But really focuses on questions of materiality. So this is why a lot of this stuff is very resonant for me. I'm so fascinated by it. It's by the kind of actual materiality of the film, of the medium itself, and the larger infrastructures that produce film. So I look at kind of what celluloid, from silent film was made out of, and where it came from, and it came from cotton that was picked and milled in the South, and it was nitrated with camphor that was harvested in Japanese occupied Formosa, which is Taiwan, and where film goes, and when after its time is up, what happens to it, and so I'm trying to suggest different ways that we can do film studies, film and media studies, beyond just looking at texts and reading what's on the screen, but kind of widen our perspective to consider a lot of different aspects of film and video history that intersect with histories of Asian racialization, for example. So there's so many things that kind of places where TT's work really intersects, including making things out of clay, but digging up dirt and making objects out of it, and then filming it. So, thank you for that, Christina.
Thank you. Okay, we have an exciting raffle reveal coming, but I just want to ask if there's any last burning questions in the audience first. Okay, if you still have a dorodango in your hand, I would ask that you come over here and place it on one of our specially appointed stands. Do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can do it from here. Okay. From, I know I keep forgetting. I'm mic'd. Mic. And also, please admire the work of your fellow artists who have all handled the mud dumpling. I'm looking forward to checking out the shine. How was that process? Was it interesting? Yeah, you liked it? Yeah. The feel of earth, there's something a little satisfying. And there are hand wipes around too, so you can...
That makes sense. It's very ritualistic too, or meditative. There's a meditative quality.
No, sure. We're missing one. I think somebody pocketed.
It could be right there.
Oh, okay.
Who has it? Okay. Okay, guys, ready? You ready for the raffle reveal? Okay, so check under your chair to see if you have a Post-it note. Just like under the seat, you know what I mean? Like stuck under the seat of your chair. Okay, there's 1, 2,
And if somebody sitting next to you left early, check under their chair.
Check under their seat. There should be 4. So I think there's 2 so far. 3. Is there a 4th one? That one. 1, 2, 3. Okay, there's still one more. Is there one?
Check the empty chairs.
Let's stick our hands under chairs. It's definitely not erotic. I what? Didn't say anything. Yes, it's breaking. Yeah.
Okay, well, the raffle winners get to take one home. So please come up, select your dorodango, and then maybe come up for a picture with your dorodango.